Boy, that was quite a ride. Unlike Kaze no Keru, where there was more of a gut thrill, Dragoness' stories struck at the heart, or at least they did for me. Once again, as I type these words, I find that I'm having difficulty determining what to say first. So, like last time, I will go over the plot and see where it takes me from there. Those of you who chose to listen through Making My Way, without reading Everything Changes first, were probably a bit disoriented by the way it started out, even with my pre-summary. Ash, along with his entire Kanto team, get away from Team Rocket Base after being held by Giovanni for most of the first book. Although it isn't really established, they're looking for Dr. Gray, the guy indirectly responsible for turning Ash into a Mew. When they don't find him at his house, half the team heads back to the Rocket Base to rescue him. Now before I go on, I have a confession to make, which anyone who's pre-read Dragoness' works have probably long been expecting. I cut portions out of the original story. Now considering it wasn't my story to begin with, did I have a right to do that? My immediate answer is that I took creative liberties, and that any musical choice and inflection of tone is already a form of departure from the original text. But that won't excuse what I did for everyone, even though I leave a link to the original text in every video. So, as I go through the plot here, I will explain the reasoning behind every major cut I made, and let you be the judge to whether or not what I did was prudent. First and foremost was my universal cut of the Pokemon speech. Whenever Dragoness has a Pokemon say something, she always has it utter its name a few times before giving the translation below. I figured I'd spare you the cringe of listening to me, a 20-something-year-old man, squeaking Eevee, Eevee, or Mew, Mew, over and over again. Internet trolls will doubtlessly declare that my fanfic readings are cringy enough already, and fuck them, but I wasn't about to spend 10% of this story making Pokemon noises. That was the main cut. My first individual case was when Ash's party was deciding who would stay or go to the Rocket Base. It had no impact on the rest of the story, and all but one of them would cease to exist by Chapter 2 for all practical purposes. So the gang heads to Rocket Base, and Giovanni asks Ash if he's decided to join up after all. Ash says no, they fight, and Wheezing blows everyone up with self-destruct. Ash barely survives the blast, and he has to take some time at home to recover. Mind you, at this point in the story, he's become a Pokemon Master for winning the Indigo League, but he hasn't yet challenged the Elite Four to be recognized as the world's best. Okay, so it looks like I'm gonna pepper this summary with critiques this time, instead of critiquing afterwards. That works, right? Here's a place where I imagine the reader split an opinion over Dragoness' writing ability. On the one hand, I think she does a great job of owning her major plot decisions. She didn't simply have Wheezing explode on a whim, she went into a lot of detail afterward about the extent of Ash's injuries. On the other hand, some things are vague, and I don't know if it's deliberate or not. When Mayo's character is introduced, one of the first things she mentions is that Ash becomes a Pokemon Master. Anyone who's ever fought Lance in the game knows that you're not a Pokemon Master until you beat the Elite Four, yet I can't tell if it works different in this world, or if that was just a mistake. I know Dragoness makes mistakes, because she names Ash's mom Philanthra for most of the fic. Towards the end, she fixes it. But either way, I took the liberty of saying Delilah each time. The point is, I occasionally have to wonder what's a mistake, and what's done on purpose. So, Mayo. I thought Mayo was a mistake at first. Gary, or at least Blue, does have an older sister named Daisy Oak, and she's not mentioned at all. But Mayo's no mistake. We find out that Ash and Gary were once friends, and Mayo wanted to be included in their fun as well. Gary rejected her as an annoying little sister, but Ash befriended her, thus putting a wedge between himself and Gary. This wouldn't have worked with Daisy, because she would have gone on a Pokemon journey before either of the boys. Even if she hadn't, her relationship with Ash probably would have gone across as sexual rather than sisterly, as Dragoness intended. So getting back to the plot, Ash reveals to Mayo that he's a Mew, and that he's been using Transform to maintain a human appearance. Mayo takes it pretty well, and tries to help him understand himself. That's important, because a lot of social dynamics go on at this point. For example, when Misty discovers who Mayo is, it's heavily implied that she's jealous. But the much bigger problem is when Giovanni himself shows up at home, determined to win back Ash through Delilah and his status as a father. Ash is understandably very upset about this, considering Giovanni previously kidnapped him, held his Pokemon hostage, had Team Rocket Pokemon attack him multiple times, tried to brainwash him, and nearly killed him. Delilah, who is still in love with Giovanni, is torn between her husband and her son, which only makes it worse. Other than Brock, Mayo is the only other person who is really able to comfort Ash in this time of pain. I'm going to pause here again to make an observation. When I read stories by male authors, they tend to center on action and honor, whereas with female authors, the focus is more on relationships and feelings. I realize that's not a hard and fast rule, but it is a general trend, and these last two authors exemplify it pretty well. It's also why I decided to read their works back to back. Anyway, amidst all of Ash's emotional turmoil, he's receiving regular dream visits from a voiceless stranger, telling him he no longer belongs with humans as a Mew. Each time, he protests against the voice and becomes ever more compelled to fight the Elite Four and accomplish his life goal. Eventually, Ash and company do get to the Indigo Plateau, where Gary sits ready to watch Ash lose. Gary's as much of an asshole as ever, yet because of their past friendship, Ash is relatively civil with him. Mayo, of course, sticks up for Ash. Now, let me just say, I freaking loved everything about Mayo in this story. She's kind and innocent, but at the same time protective and self-confident. I thought her childhood nicknames with Ash were adorable, and her admiration for him fuels her motivation to be greater herself. The antics between those two make them the most solid characters in this story, and I would have wished for more, if not for the dark turn later on. I'm convinced that Dragoness gave Misty the spotlight and won, simply because it would be too heart-wrenching to murder Mayo in childbirth. Stories don't make me cry. I didn't cry when Ashura's evil made Delilah die of a broken heart for her son. I didn't cry when Nekiro starved himself to death after failing to protect the world. I didn't cry when Ash killed Richie's Pikachu, or Richie, or Misty. But if Mayo had died, I probably would have bawled my eyes out. That's what this is all leading up to, after all. You may start out this fic thinking it's a relatively directionless but heartfelt story. It's not until later that you realize Dragoness has been building up the characters this whole time so that when Ashura goes dark side and throws away all his relationships, you really feel the depth of the sacrifice. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Back to the present plot. Ash needs to defeat each of the Elite Four, but he can't reveal himself as a Mew because he's afraid they might disqualify him if they find out. The problem is, he can only maintain human form for about 20 minutes before he has to transform back. Long story short, he beats Lorelei, but he cuts it too close, and she discovers his secret right after their match. Everyone's surprised, but they let him continue after all. Okay, so here's where I made my second major cut. I skipped over the Bruno and Agatha battles. Here's reason number 1. They had minimal impact on the plot. There are no revelations about relationships, or how him being a Mew impacts the battle. All you need to know is that he won. Reason 2, my buff guy voice for Bruno sucks, and my old lady voice for Agatha really sucks. You may not think it's so bad until you hear me trying to shoehorn aggression into those voices. Gengar! Confuse Ray! Reason 3, Dragoness may be good at battle descriptions, but not the tactics or logic. Neither is the Pokemon anime, but that doesn't cut it. You don't beat Bruno of the Elite Four with a Drowsy you caught in the wild less than a month ago. I mentioned this critique in her first story as well, so I'll shut up about it now. Anyway, Ash makes it to Lance, and somehow manages to bring the battle down to a one-on-one against his Dragonite. Team Rocket suddenly interrupts the battle, and Ash once again finds that he's been kidnapped by Giovanni. It's like the Mewtwo power armor experiment all over again, only with more control this time. Ash is in a Mew-shaped suit that uses his own psychic energy to power itself. Giovanni is then able to draw out more psychic power and direct it at wherever he wants. Giovanni tests the machine on Richie and Billy, whom he's kidnapped, and Ash struggles with all his might against the machine to keep himself from hurting them anymore. He almost overloads the machine, but in the end, it turns all of his power back upon him. Once again, he very nearly dies. This part of the fic was probably my favorite to record. I immensely enjoyed voicing Giovanni at the peak of his wicked glee, while having Ash and his friends make a futile effort to resist. There's just something about the foil contrast of good and evil in the same room together that I appreciate. Probably the reminder that there is such a thing as objective good and evil, no matter how much modern society wants to insist otherwise. Anyway, Ash awakes sometime later on a mountain to discover that he's been rescued by another Mew. The same Mew, it turns out, that's been talking to him in his dreams this whole time. He introduces himself as Nekiro and invites Ash to a gathering of all the Mews in the world. All of them are as skeptical of Ash's human friendliness as Nekiro, and one mentions some prophecy about a dark Mew. Nekiro brushes it off, and he and Ash leave when the meeting adjourns. I have two perspectives about this. My childhood perspective from 2001 and my adult perspective here in 2016. Child me used to think that it would be super amazing to have a Mew friend that I could talk to every night, who would tell me that I'm special. I also thought that being invited to an exclusive meeting of rare Pokemon and being welcomed into their ranks would be the happiest feeling in the world. At the time, I had transferred middle schools and had no friends, so I guess it was natural. Everyone craves love and acceptance. Adult me, on the other hand, acknowledges that Ash's relationship with Mews was not a desirable one. The dream conversations were always an annoyance to him, and the gathering of Mews was the furthest thing from a My Little Pony friendship table. This was supposed to be the first real foreshadowing of the evil to come, with the Dark Mew prophecy being Chekhov's gun. Incidentally, I still wonder where all these prophecies in popular culture come from. In the Bible, God tells prophets the future to prove he's real, but in entertainment, nobody seems to bother justifying a prophecy's origin. "And the world will turn to ash!" Says who? Says your mom! So anyway, after that excitement, you never see the other Mews again in this story. Ash wants to go home. Nikiro tries his best to stop him, but he finally quits when they get to the Rocket HQ in Saffron City. It's one of the last scenes with Giovanni, and to Ash's surprise, Giovanni is alone and crying. After everything he's done, it appears he finally feels remorse for tearing apart his family in a grab for power. I won't lie, I found it kinda touching. I might have appreciated this part more if Ash hadn't said, "I'm going home," 6 times in one chapter. This is another point where I abridged the story to make it less repetitive. So Ash makes it back, and everyone is tremendously happy to see him alive. Dragoness takes a little time to show how things had been in Ash's absence, and again, her writing shines in this regard. Any scrub could write like this. Ash: "Hey guys, I'm back and not dead!" Everyone: "Neat! Wanna have dinner?" But Dragoness really does a good job prioritizing the human element. Before returning to the Indigo Plateau, Ash goes over to the Oak residence to invite Gary and Mayo along. Gary blusters that he wouldn't have been sad if Ash had died, and Mayo whispers that he actually was grieving. This causes Ash to flash back to just before their journeys began. Long story short, Gary was still a dick back then, which really makes me wonder why Ash continues yearning for his friendship. But enough about yearning for dicks. Ash is on his way, and he's got a plan. He's making his way any way that he can. Ash and company return to Indigo Plateau, where the Elite Four are waiting. Lance informs him that they will have a one-on-one rematch, since that was how they left off when Ash got recaptured. Ash makes a critical decision to fight as himself, Mew, much to the astonishment of the other elites. He puts up a worthy fight, but still gets mowed down by Dragonite in the end. Again, I gotta interrupt to voice my thoughts. Ash has never been that smart, not in the show, nor in Dragoness's portrayal here. But just for that moment, I really thought he was being tactical rather than just gutsy. Out of all his Pokemon, Mew was the best choice he could have made. And to top it all off, he was a Mew who knew Blizzard. If he'd just done that a couple of times, he would have won. I know it wouldn't have made for as interesting a battle sequence, but strategy is kind of a crucial element in Pokemon. Kinda like sleeping is necessary for health, and killing infidels is necessary for being a good Muslim. See Quran 9 verse 111. It's all good, though, because the Elite Four are so impressed with Ash that they decide to make him a champion anyway. He gets a big celebration meal, a big shiny badge, and is as happy as he'll ever be in this fanfic. But that's the problem with reaching the top. There's nowhere left to go but down.